300 Apache braves, each one fixing their gaze on a ranch house of Thaddeus Whitmore through the dawn fog. Their ceremonial paint shimmering in the first rays of sunlight, their mounts breathing visible puffs in the crisp desert morning, and every warrior among them possessed motives for wanting his death. Yet half a day before, Thad was merely another resentful cattle rancher attempting to erase memories of the conflict that cost him his limb and trust in mankind. The day was ending across his modest livestock enterprise in the Arizona Territory when gunfire resonated from Eagles Canyon. Most people would have disregarded the sounds, while wise individuals would have secured their homes and acted as though they heard nothing. However, something regarding those shots, frantic and scattered as if someone battled for survival, compelled Thad to seize his weapon and head toward danger. 3 gunshot wounds stained a young Apache brave's leather garment red, pooling beneath him to blend in with the desert soil. He discovered the young Apache brave lying prone in the earth. The youth appeared no older than 22, and judging by the ornate beadwork adorning his attire, he was an ordinary warrior. This person held significance. Thad's initial impulse was to retreat, abandoning the Native American to perish as countless others had done. Indeed, most white settlers in the region would have fired another round into him for certainty. The Apache had been attacking settlements throughout the summer, and animosity ran profound between both peoples. When the young man's eyelids opened and met his gaze, not displaying terror or rage, but an unusual recognition, something within Thad's heart fractured. The warrior attempted speech, blood foaming from his mouth. Before turning his head back to the sand, he said one word in broken English: "Please." Thad gazed down at him, his finger trembling on the rifle's trigger. He had every logical reason to leave. This Apache likely participated in burning the Morrison homestead the previous month, and could have joined the war band that struck the stagecoach near Tombstone. Yet observing the youth bleeding in the dirt, Thad saw only another young soldier dying distant from home. He made the decision. He secured his rifle, dismounted, and lifted the wounded Apache onto his horse. The journey back to his ranch seemed like the most extended mile of his existence. Every shadow among the rocks appearing to conceal a war party prepared to pierce him with arrows. But he brought the Apache to his cabin, placed him on his own bed, and began tending the wounds. The bullets had avoided vital organs, though blood loss was significant. As Thad worked by lantern light, removing the shirt and applying pressure to the wounds, he noticed something that froze his hands. Around the young warrior's neck hung a small leather pouch containing a photograph, cracked and faded but unmistakable. The image showed a white woman and a young Apache boy, perhaps 8 years old. Both the woman and the boy smiled at the camera as she placed her hand on the boy's shoulder. Thad's breath caught. He'd seen mixed families before, but this was different. This picture had significance because it suggested that this Apache was connected to the white world, that he wasn't just a raider but was caught between two worlds like Thad had been after the war. As morning broke over the desert, Thad succeeded in stopping the bleeding and getting water into the unconscious warrior. He was washing his hands in a basin when he heard it, the sound that turned his blood to ice. War drums, distant but unmistakable, echoing across the desert from Apache territory. What chilled him wasn't just the drums themselves, but their pattern, which made Thad's hands tremble as he reached for his rifle. 3 brief beats, then 4 extended ones, then silence. He'd heard this pattern during his cavalry service along the Colorado River. It was a death song, not a signal for hunting or war. Someone important had disappeared, and the Apache were mourning. The wounded warrior stirred on the bed, his eyes opening slowly. When he saw Thad standing over him with a rifle, he didn't flinch. "My father, he looks for me," he said in English after whispering something in Apache. "Your father?" Thad spoke barely above a whisper. "Chief Running Elk of the White Mountain Band. I am Nownish. You call me Running Bear." The young man struggled to sit up, pressing a hand to his bandaged ribs. "I was riding to meet Colonel Hayes, talk about peace, make a treaty," I said. Thad felt the floor drop out from under him. A peace envoy. He'd rescued a peace envoy. This indicated that the Apache were not only looking for any missing warriors, but also for the chief's son, who was supposed to be negotiating a ceasefire. "Jesus Christ," Thad muttered, sinking into his chair. "Do you know what this means?" If your people think the whites killed you during a peace mission, war. Running Bear finished for him. Bad war. My father, he trusts no white man now. The drums grew louder, closer. Thad could hear them coming from multiple directions now, north, south, and east. They were being surrounded, and he was sitting in his cabin with the one person who could either save them all or get them killed. Running Bear tried to stand, then collapsed back onto the bed with a grunt of pain. I must go to them, tell them I live. You can barely sit up, boy. You take 3 steps outside, and you'll bleed to death before you make it to porch. After that, you take me. Thad laughed, but his laughter was not funny. You want me to ride out there with you? A white man carrying a wounded Apache warrior? They'll fill us both with arrows before we get close enough to explain. Maybe, or maybe they listen. Running Bear's dark eyes fixed on Thad's face. Why you help me? You know who I am now. You know what happened if my father think whites kill his son. It was a fair question, and Thad didn't have a good answer. He looked at the white woman, an Apache boy in the picture that was still on the bedside table. Which woman is that in the picture? Running Bear's expression softened. It's my mother, Sarah Mackenzie. She was teacher at mission school, fell in love with Apache warrior who become my father. She teach me English. Teach me about white man's world before the sickness take her. And your father let her? My father loved her, but when she died, his heart turned cold toward whites. He say white man's diseases kill his woman. White man's bullets kill his people. Only reason he agreed to peace talk is because... Running Bear paused as if weighing whether to continue. Due to what? Because I tell him there are good white men, men who see Apache as people, not animals, men like the one who saved his son's life. The drum stopped suddenly, leaving an eerie silence that felt more threatening than the noise had been. Thad moved a window and peered through a crack in the wooden shutters. What he saw made his stomach drop. Riders, at least 50 of them, moving in perfect formation across the desert toward his ranch. Even at this distance, he could see the war paint and feathers, the glint of sunlight on rifle barrels and tomahawk blades. They're coming, he whispered. Running Bear struggled to his feet, leaning heavily against the wall. How many? More than I can remember. Your father doesn't take chances, does he? He cannot afford to. Too many of our people have died trusting white men. Running Bear managed to walk to the window, though each step left a dark spot of blood on the wooden floor. When he looked outside, his face went pale. He said quietly, "This is not a search party. This is war party." But before Thad could ask Thad what that meant, they heard something that made both of them freeze. Hoofbeats, but not from the Apache war party coming from the desert. These were coming from behind the ranch house, from the direction of town. Thad cursed under his breath and moved to the back window. He could make out another fast-approaching group of riders in the morning fog. At least 20 white men led by Sheriff Marcus Dalton and Deputy Will Hendricks. They were armed to the teeth and riding hard, like men heading into battle. Thad muttered, "No, no, no," as his worst nightmare unfolded before his eyes. The Apache must have been moving across the desert, and the townspeople must have heard the drums. They were now coming to support his ranch's defense, which meant, Running Bear observed, his voice heavy with resignation, white men coming too. Now both sides come here to fight. This is a disaster, Thad said, grabbing his rifle and checking the ammunition. Your people are going to think I called for backup. My people are going to think you're here to scout for an attack. Running Bear leaned against a window frame, blood seeping through his bandages. When they meet, many will die. Good men on both sides. The Apache war party had stopped about 300 yards from the ranch house, forming a curved line that stretched from north to south. Through his field glasses, Thad could see Chief Running Elk himself, a tall, imposing figure on a paint horse, his face streaked with black and red war paint. The chief was looking around the ranch buildings for signs of a son. Behind them, Sheriff Dalton's posse was closing fast, dust clouds marking their approach. Both groups would be within shooting distance of one another in about 10 minutes, with Thad's ranch house directly in the middle. There's got to be a way out of this, Thad said, more to himself than to Running Bear. Some way to let both sides know what really happened before they start killing each other. White flag, Running Bear suggested weakly, "I go out with white flag. Tell my father I'm safe." A white flag won't stop bullets if someone gets trigger happy and you can barely stand. With his agitation, Thad paced a small cabin with a limp that was more obvious. Besides, your own people might not recognize you from that distance. What if they believe I'm using you as a human shield and forcing you out there? My father, he will not wait long if he thinks whites have killed his son, Running Bear said after a brief moment of silence that chilled Thad. What will he do? He will signal the other bands. Mescaleros, subtly, Chiricahua in the west. They are all waiting to hear from him regarding peace talks. Thad stared at him. How many warriors are we discussing? Maybe 1,000, possibly more. Thad felt the weight of that number hit him hard in the body. 1,000 Apache warriors united in war against the white settlements. He had made the decision to save one young man who was wounded, and as a result, every ranch, every town, and every family between Tucson and here would vanish. He could see the Apache war party beginning to spread out through the front window, preparing for what appeared to be an attack formation. Chief Running Elk had raised his rifle above his head, some kind of signal that made the other warriors start checking their weapons. From the back window, Sheriff Dalton's men were maybe 5 minutes away, riding hard and ready for a fight. Running Bear closed his eyes, swaying on his feet. "You should not have saved me, white man. Now you die for kindness." But Thad was studying the photograph again, the image of Running Bear's white mother and her Apache son. He was developing a potentially fatal, possibly suicidal, but potentially their only option idea. He spoke suddenly. "That picture. Does your father know about it? Does he know that you carry a picture of your mother?" "Yes. He gave it to me when I become warrior. Say it remind me that love can exist between our peoples." Then perhaps... Thad began, but he was interrupted by a sound that stopped both men in their tracks. A gunshot, not coming from the ranch, but from somewhere in between the two groups that were approaching. Everything changed in a split second when a single gunshot reverberated through the desert like thunder. Through his field glasses, Thad saw the Apache war party accelerate, warriors advancing on their horses and raising their weapons. Chief Running Elk's face twisted with rage as he pointed toward Sheriff Dalton's approaching posse. "Someone fired early," Thad whispered, his stomach sinking. "Some nervous cowboy just started a war." But Running Bear was looking in a different direction, toward a rocky outcrop about halfway between the two groups. He squinted against the morning sun and said, "Wait, neither your people nor mine were responsible for that shot." As his blood turned to ice, Thad swung his glasses toward the rocks. There, barely visible behind a boulder, was a flash of blue fabric. Cavalry blue. He let out a sigh. "Son of a bitch." Soldiers are out there. All of the pieces suddenly fit together. Colonel Hayes, the man Running Bear was supposed to meet for peace talks, must have sent a patrol to escort the Apache delegation. However, the soldiers probably mistook the shooting between the town people and the war party for an Apache assault on civilians when began. Another shot cracked across the desert, this time definitely from the cavalry position. Thad could see muzzle flash from behind the rocks as the hidden soldiers opened fire on both groups simultaneously. Thad's voice was hollow with disbelief as he said, "They're shooting at everyone." The cavalry believe the battle is three-way. Chief Running Elk's war cry pierced the morning air as his warriors charged toward the sound of gunfire. From behind the ranch, Sheriff Dalton's men were spurring their horses forward, convinced the Apache were attacking. And somewhere in the rocks, maybe a dozen cavalry troopers were shooting at anything that moved, trying to restore order with bullets. The strength with which Running Bear grasped Thad's arm was surprising. "You have to stop this. You have to get to my father before..." As the three groups opened fire on one another, the gunfire drowned out his words. Bullets whined through the air, horses screamed, and men shouted orders that no one could hear over the chaos. Thad watched in horror as Sheriff Dalton's youngest deputy, Tommy Morrison, fell from his saddle with an Apache arrow in his shoulder. On the other side, a cavalry bullet meant for someone else struck a young Apache warrior as he fell from his horse. "This is madness," Thad said, but he was already moving, grabbing his hat and checking his rifle. "I'll be going there." You'll be killed before you take 10 steps. Running Bear protested. You will be shot at by all 3 sides. Maybe, but if I don't try, we're all dead anyway. Thad looked at the photograph one more time, then handed it to Running Bear. You ensure that your father sees this in case something happens to me. You inform him that a white man held the beliefs your mother instilled in you. Despite his pain, Running Bear fought to get to his feet with determination. Then we go together. You can't walk straight at all. I'm a rider. Thad stared at him. The kid was right. If anyone could get close enough to Chief Running Elk to stop this massacre, it would be his own son. However, it would be suicide for Running Bear and them both to get Running Bear onto a horse and ride across a battlefield filled with flying bullets. The gunfire was intensifying now, and through the smoke and dust, Thad could see men falling on all sides. Sheriff Dalton was shouting orders, trying to pull his men back toward cover. Chief Running Elk had divided his warriors into 2 groups, one attacking the cavalry position and another moving to flank the townspeople. In maybe 5 more minutes, this would turn into a full-scale slaughter. What would you do if Thad were your character? In the knowledge that you and a wounded Apache warrior would likely die before reaching Chief Running Elk, would you risk everything to ride into that battlefield? Or stay safe in the cabin and watch as hundreds of good men killed each other over a misunderstanding? Tell me in the comments. I need to know which choice you'd make, because what Thad decided next would either save 3 peoples from war or guarantee that none of them would survive to see sunset. Thad made a decision. He ran toward the barn, throwing open the cabin door and yelling over his shoulder, "Come on, boy. If we're going to die, let's die trying to do something right." But as they reached the horses, something happened that neither of them had expected. A bugle call pierced through the gunfire, long, clear, and unmistakable. Although it wasn't coming from the rocks where the soldiers were pinned down, it was the cavalry's signal for a ceasefire. It was coming from behind the war party led by Chief Running Elk, with his hand on the bridle of his horse. Thad came to a complete halt. Through the dust and smoke, he could see a new group of riders approaching from the north. Blue uniforms, guiding flags snapping in the desert wind, and at their head rode a man Thad recognized even at this distance. Colonel William Hayes himself, leading what looked like a full company of cavalry. The colonel, Running Bear breathed, leaning heavily against the barn wall. He comes to talk about peace, but now the gunfire began to slacken as all 3 groups noticed the approaching cavalry column. Chief Running Elk raised his hand, signaling his warriors to hold their fire and regroup. Sheriff Dalton's men were pulling back toward the ranch buildings, using the momentary lull to tend their wounded and reload. But Colonel Hayes wasn't slowing down. His column was riding hard toward the battlefield, and Thad could see the anger in the man's posture even from this distance. When the colonel arrived to make peace, his escort patrol was caught in a 3-way gunfight. He was going to think the Apache broke the peace talks. Thad realized. He'll order a full attack. Running Bear gave a grim nod. Also, my father believed that the white people planned this trap. Both sides now believed the other betrayed them. As Colonel Hayes' column drew closer, Thad could hear him shouting orders. The cavalry was deploying into battle formation, preparing to charge Chief Running Elk's position. On the other side, the Apache warriors were spreading out along the ridgeline, ready to rain arrows down on anyone who approached. After making it to the ranch house, Sheriff Dalton was banging on the front door. "Whitmore, you in there? We need to ford up before they overrun us." Thad looked at Running Bear, who was barely staying upright, but whose eyes burned with desperate determination. "There's still time," the young Apache said. "If I can get to my father before the soldiers start charging, you'll never cross that open ground. Even if you're as wounded as you are, then we need another way." Running Bear's eyes widened when he noticed something behind Thad, the water tower. Thad looked around. His ranch's wooden water tower stood 30 feet high, positioned halfway between the house and the main battlefield. From up there, a man could be seen by all 3 groups simultaneously. You want to climb up there and wave a white flag? They'll use you for target practice. Not white flag. Running Bear pulled the photograph from his shirt, holding it up so the morning sun caught the image. "This, my father will recognize it even from distance. And your colonel, he will see Apache warrior try and make peace, not war." It was insane. The water tower offered no protection, and getting up there would put them in full view of every gun on the battlefield. But it was also the only position where they could be seen by everyone at once. Colonel Hayes was maybe 2 minutes from charging the Apache line. Chief Running Elk's warriors had arrows nocked and ready. Sheriff Dalton's men were taking positions around the ranch buildings, preparing for a siege. "I'll go," Thad said suddenly. "I'll carry the photograph up there. You're too weak to climb, but at least you'll be alive to tell me what really happened if someone shoots at me." No, he was grabbed by the running bear. "Must be me. Probably the chief's son. You just white rancher to them, they not listen." Through the front window of the house, Sheriff Dalton was gesturing frantically for them to come inside. Colonel Hayes had raised a saber to signal the charge from the north. Chief Running Elk was also observing a war arrow by pulling back his bowstring from the ridgeline. Time was running out. Thad made a decision that would either save hundreds of lives or get them both killed in the next 60 seconds. If you're enjoying this story and want to see how it ends, hit that subscribe button, because this next part will change everything you think you know about courage. "We go together," he said, grabbing Running Bear around the waist and half carrying him toward the water tower. "You hold that photograph high, and I'll make sure you don't fall." But as they started across the open ground between the barn and the tower, a rifle cracked from the rocks. The bullet whined past Thad's ear so close he felt the heat of it. Someone in the cavalry patrol thought they were making a run for it and had decided to stop them. But instead of hitting the dirt like any sane man would do, Thad kept moving toward the water tower, dragging Running Bear with him. "They're shooting at us." Running Bear gasped, blood from his wounds, leaving a trail in the dust behind them. "Let them," Thad growled. "Maybe that'll get everyone's attention." More shots followed, kicking up dirt around their feet, but something strange was happening. The gunfire was actually coming to a halt, not more. The sudden appearance of the wounded Apache and the limping white rancher on the same side of the battlefield caught the attention of all three groups. They reached the base of the water tower just as Colonel Hayes' bugle sounded again, not a charge this time, but a hold position. Through the ladder rungs, Thad could see the colonel had his field glasses trained on them, trying to figure out what the hell was happening. "Can you go up?" Thad inquired. Running Bear looked up at the 30-foot ladder, then at his blood-soaked shirt. "Have to." They started up together, Thad below to catch Running Bear if he fell, the young Apache above him, moving one painful rung at a time. Each step sent fresh blood dripping down onto Thad's hands, but Running Bear kept climbing. Halfway up, Running Bear's strength gave out. He started to fall backward when his hands slipped from the rungs, but Thad caught him and used his own body to press him against the ladder. Thad whispered, "I've got you, son." Just a little further. "Why?" Running Bear asked, his voice weak. "Why you risk everything for enemy?" Thad thought about that as they resumed climbing. "Maybe because you're not my enemy. Perhaps due to the fact that your mother was correct. Love can exist between our peoples. Or maybe because I'm just too damn stubborn to let good men die over a misunderstanding." They reached the top platform of the water tower as the sun climbed higher, casting their shadows long across the desert battlefield. From up here, Thad could see everything. Chief Running Elk and his warriors spread along the ridge, Colonel Hayes' cavalry in formation, Sheriff Dalton's men positioned around the ranch buildings, and the trap patrol in the rocks where this whole mess had started. Every gun on the battlefield was pointed in their direction now. Running Bear pulled out the photograph, his hands shaking from blood loss and exhaustion, but his voice, when he called out across the desert, was strong and clear. "My father," he shouted in Apache, then repeated it in English. "Father, I live. I'm safe." The effect was immediate. Chief Running Elk lowered his bow, his war paint unable to hide the shock and relief on his face. He pushed his horse forward so that he could get close enough to see, and when he saw his son standing on the water tower, he let out a cry that was both sad and happy. Colonel Hayes, on the other hand, was moving forward as well, but his expression was very different. He could see the officer's expression of suspicion and rage through the field glasses that Thad wore around his neck. The colonel probably mistook this for an Apache PLO, in which a wounded warrior served as a human shield. "Colonel Hayes," Thad shouted, his voice carrying across the desert. "This man is Chief Running Elk's son. He was coming to meet with you for peace talks when bandits shot him. I brought him to my ranch to save his life after finding that he was dying." The colonel reined in his horse, close enough now that they could see each other's faces clearly. "Whitmore, Thomas Whitmore?" Thad was surprised the colonel knew his name, but he nodded. "Sir, yes. 3rd Cavalry, Colorado Territory. Discharged 1868. Something in Colonel Hayes's posture changed. He'd served with enough veterans to recognize one of his own, but he was still suspicious. "Why are there 300 Apache warriors surrounding your ranch? If that's true..." The image caught the sunlight as Running Bear held it up. "Because they came looking for me, Colonel. My father thought white men had killed his son during peace mission. He came here for war but found this." Chief Running Elk had ridden close enough to see the photograph clearly. When he recognized the image of his beloved wife and young son, his expression crumbled. The war paint couldn't hide the tears that began streaming down his weathered face. The old chief dismounted and walked to the base of the water tower, looking up at his son. His voice broke up with emotion as he spoke in Apache. "What's he saying?" Thad inquired. "He says he thought he had lost me like he lost my mother. He says he came here to burn the world in revenge, but instead found that there are still white men with honor." Colonel Hayes had heard enough. He holstered his saber and rode forward, stopping halfway between his cavalry line and Chief Running Elk's position. "Chief," he called out, "I believe we have some talking to do." But just as it seemed like peace might be possible, Sheriff Dalton chose that moment to make the worst decision of his life. Sheriff Dalton burst out of the ranch house with his rifle raised, pointing it directly at Chief Running Elk. "Don't you move, you red devil. I will not allow this to continue." The peaceful moment shattered like glass. Colonel Hayes yelled orders to his men, and the Apache warriors immediately raised their weapons, returning everyone to firing at one another. "Dalton, no!" Thad yelled from the water tower. "Stand down!" But the sheriff was beyond reason. Years of hatred and fear had taken over. "That Apache killed the Morrison boy's father last month. I don't care if he's here for peace talks. He's a murderer." Chief Running Elk's moment of emotional vulnerability was replaced by cold rage as his hand moved to his tomahawk. Colonel Hayes was forced to raise his saber once more as the other Apache warriors began to advance, preparing to defend the sheriff regardless of whether he agreed with him. Running Bear almost lost strength as he swayed on the platform, but he managed to speak Apache to his father. Whatever he said made the chief pause, his hand freezing on his weapon. "What did you say to him?" Thad asked. "I told him that if blood is spilled now, my mother's spirit will never forgive him, that she believed in peace between our peoples, and her son still believes." Chief Running Elk looked up at the water tower, then at Sheriff Dalton, then at Colonel Hayes. For a long moment, the fate of hundreds of lives hung in the balance. Then the old chief did something that surprised everyone. He dropped his tomahawk in the dust and walked slowly toward Sheriff Dalton, his hands empty and visible. "You speak of Morrison," the chief said in careful English. "I am aware of this name. Young warrior from my band. He killed white farmer, but this warrior, he not listened to chief. He acted alone against my orders. If you want justice, I'll bring his head to you." Sheriff Dalton's rifle wavered. This wasn't what he'd expected. You'd turn over one of your own for peace?" "Yes. My son teach me that some things worth more than revenge." Colonel Hayes dismounted and walked forward, positioning himself between the two men. "Sheriff, lower your weapon." "Chief Running Elk, I appreciate your offer, but under the terms of our proposed treaty, we'll handle justice through proper channels." Running Bear was fading fast, but he managed to pull Thad's attention to something happening on the horizon. He whispered, "Look, more cyclists." He felt his stomach sink as Thad raised the field glasses. Although they were not townspeople or cavalry, another group was approaching from the east. They were Apache, but they came from a different group. They were dressed in war paint, had their weapons ready, and were speeding toward the group. Running Bear breathed. "Mescalero, the backers of my father. They come because they heard war drums this morning." The approaching warriors numbered at least 100, and from their formation and paint, They were coming for battle, not negotiation. They had assumed that the peace talks had failed, and that war had begun after hearing the drums and seeing the smoke from the gunfire. Chief Running Elk saw them too and immediately mounted his horse. He began riding toward the approaching Mescalero band, shouting orders in Apache, trying to stop them before they attacked. But the Mescalero warriors were too spread out to stop quickly, so they couldn't hear him over the roar of their horses' hooves. In less than 2 minutes, they would hit Colonel Hayes' cavalry line like a thunderbolt. "We have to get down from here," Thad said. But Running Bear was unconscious now, finally succumbing to blood loss and exhaustion. Down below, chaos was erupting again. Colonel Hayes was shouting orders, trying to get his men into defensive positions. Sheriff Dalton was yelling for his deputies to take cover. And somewhere in the distance, the war cries of 100 Mescalero warriors grew louder with each passing second. Thad looked at the unconscious young Apache in his arms, then at the photograph still clutched in Running Bear's hand. Everything they'd accomplished, all the understanding they built between the groups, was about to be destroyed by warriors who didn't know that peace was possible. Unless someone could reach the Mescalero in time to tell them the truth, Thad made a decision that would have seemed impossible an hour earlier. With the unconscious young man slung over his shoulder, he grabbed Running Bear and started down the ladder as quickly as he could. When he reached the ground, Chief Running Elk was riding back toward them, his face grim. "Cannot stop them," he said. "Too far, too fast." "Maybe you can't," Thad said, gently laying Running Bear in the shade of the water tower. "But maybe someone else can." Colonel Hayes spurred his horse toward Thad and Chief Running Elk. "What do you have in mind, Whitmore?" "A cavalry charge," Thad said, "but not to attack, to intercept. You and the chief ride together toward the Mescalero. When they see an Apache chief and a cavalry colonel side by side, not fighting but riding together, it might make them pause long enough to listen." Sheriff Dalton had joined them, his rifle finally lowered. "That's suicide. These warriors are raring to go. Before you get within shouting distance, they will cut you down." Chief Running Elk looked at his unconscious son, then at the approaching dust cloud. "It's a good plan, but dangerous for White Soldier." "Dangerous for all of us," Colonel Hayes replied, "but it's better than the alternative." He turned to his men. "Lieutenant Morrison, you're in command. If this goes badly, retreat to the ranch buildings and hold position until reinforcements arrive." "Sir, I can't let you ride out there alone." "I won't be alone." Hayes looked at Chief Running Elk. "Chief, will you ride with me?" The elderly Apache gave a solemn nod. "For my son, for peace." They mounted their horses and rode out together. The grizzled cavalry colonel and the painted Apache chief, two old warriors who'd spent decades fighting each other, now united and tried to prevent a massacre. Thad watched them disappear into the dust cloud, then knelt beside Running Bear. The young man's breathing was shallow but steady. His hand was still holding the picture. "Come on, boy," Thad whispered. "Don't die on me now. When all is said and done, your father will need your assistance translating." The sound of the approaching Mescalero war party suddenly changed. The thunder of hooves was slowing, and the war cries were becoming confused shouts. Through his field glasses, Thad could see Hayes and Chief Running Elk in the middle of the Mescalero formation, both men gesturing toward the ranch and speaking rapidly. It looked like it was working. As their chief's ally explained the situation, the warriors were reining in their horses and lowering their weapons. However, this was a delicate time. One misspoken word or gesture could still result in a bloodbath. Alongside Thad, Sheriff Dalton took a comfortable seat. "Never thought I'd see the day when I'd be hoping for Apache warriors to make the right choice." "People change," Thad said. "Occasionally, it just takes the right moment to demonstrate a different approach." The group of riders began making their way back toward the ranch after what appeared to be a period of time that was probably only 10 minutes. The Mescalero war leader and his lieutenants followed Hayes and Chief Running Elk to the front. The rest of the warriors had spread out in a loose formation that looked more like an escort than an attack force. When they got to the ranch, Chief Running Elk immediately got off his horse and sat down next to his son. Running Bear's eyes fluttered open, and when he saw his father's face, he managed a weak smile. The chief spoke in English, "It is done, my son," hoping that everyone could understand. "There is peace. Your mom would be pleased." Colonel Hayes dismounted and approached Thad. "Whitmore, what you did today, it took courage. True courage if you ever want to rejoin the service. I'd be honored to have you in my command." Thad shook his head. "Thank you, Colonel. But I think I'll stick to ranching, despite the fact that I suspect I'm going to have some interesting neighbors from now on," the individual stated. From his son, Chief Running Elk looked up. "You saved Running Bear's life. Apache people do not forget such things. We are protecting this ranch and its land right now. We are in danger from any man who threatens you." The three groups collaborated for the next hour to care for the injured and create the foundation for a long-term peace treaty.